Declaration on Climate Finance, and the UAE pledged $200 million to the IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Trust. 134 countries representing over 480 million farmers and over 70% of total food system production emissions signed the Food Declaration to include food system transformation in national climate plans by 2025. We hosted the Local Climate Action Summit, which convened a historic number of mayors, governors, NGOs, business and other local leaders alongside parties to respond to the global stocktake. And we hosted the Business and Philanthropy Climate Forum, which announced the mobilization of $5 billion through several unique blended finance structures to turbocharge the climate transition in emerging economies. On negotiations, there is a sense of optimism and progress. Yesterday, we hosted a global stocktake high-level event on adaptation, moderated by Her Excellency Razan al-Mubarak, which included 26 heads of state and government and other high-level participants. Today saw the GST high-level events on means of implementation, which included remarks by the COP28 President and mitigation, with over 50 leaders and ministers speaking across the two events. We continue to urge negotiators to get to the text and to work constructively with the co-facilitators, and we know that they are going to deliver great results here at COP28. We're seeing some early signs of progress and urge parties to build on the momentum of the day one decision on loss and damage. We also delivered the most ambitious integrated package of energy solutions ever developed, the Global Decarbonization Accelerator, a comprehensive plan for system-wide change, addressing the demand and the supply of energy at the same time, speeding up the energy transition and drastically reducing global emissions. A tremendous achievement from colleagues in the energy team who I am delighted to be joined by today and who will share further details of today's announcements momentarily. I know that already feels like an awful lot that we've delivered, but I'm proud to say that this is truly just the beginning of many things that we have to come. As we look ahead to our thematic days, we'll continue to deliver an ambitious decision in response to the global stocktake and demonstrate a new era of climate leadership. Before I touch upon tomorrow, I know we've had some long lines and some issues with accessing press conferences, also some start times, and I want to assure you we are working to resolve these issues alongside our friends at the UNFCCC who, as always, are helping us and being as supportive and a partner as you would expect. Now on to tomorrow, where we will focus on health, relief, recovery and peace. First time we're going to have a health day, where we will see announcements of new health climate finance programs in response to country priorities and needs. United action to bring early action to scale and to get ahead of disasters, initiatives on climate and health, declarations on climate, relief, recovery and peace, and more. With that, I now hand over to our CEO, Adnan, to give us more about the energy outcome today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Majid. And let me say what a great pleasure it is to be with such distinguished members of the Fourth Estate today and to talk about what's happened over the last couple of days. Majid has given you a very comprehensive overview, but let me add a little bit of context. I think if you think about the events of the last 3 days, we've seen some extraordinary outcomes at the beginning of a COP. I know many of you have covered many COPs and you've seen sometimes a tortuous start. So starting with the adoption of the agenda, with a very clear agreement that was negotiated with all parties well before the opening of the COP, we were able to start with a smooth adoption of the agenda that maximizes the time and the space that's available for the negotiation and creates a framework for negotiation that has great clarity. So I think that is something that's actually quite significant, probably means more to negotiators than to the general public, but it really bodes well for the constructive spirit that underlies the COP process this year. The adoption of the loss and damage decision is the first time a substantive decision has ever been adopted at the opening day of a COP. This decision was negotiated painstakingly over the previous year after Sharm and represented a very delicate consensus. But the fact that it was the consultation process allowed its adoption on the first day also released this kind of constructive spirit that allowed us to capitalize the fund completely, unexpectedly close to $700 million today and growing. So these are huge signals for the constructive process that the COP has started on, and the action agenda that we've seen over the last days on the financial side has been powerful. Majid mentioned the launch of Altera. We have very strong signals from the reform of the multilateral development banks. The World Bank President spoke about substantial quantum of financing, concessional financing that will be channeled into climate, and we're beginning to see some real hopeful aspects of discussions around finance. And that includes the announcement today by the United States of a $3 billion commitment to the replenishment of the Green Climate Fund that brings the Green Climate Fund to the highest level of capitalization that it's ever had. These are all positive signals, and I think that this momentum and this kind of positive spirit we're seeing at the beginning of the COP positions us very strongly for the next phase, which is the negotiation process with the subsidiary bodies over the next week, leading into the political phase in the last week. One of the most significant aspects of the last couple of days has been the launch of our energy package. This is something that has been led by the COP president over the last year. We have worked hard on raising ambition, and we've developed essentially a program of decarbonization that keeps in view our North Star. And we consider our North Star, our guiding star here at COP28, to keep 1.5 within reach. So everything we've built on the energy transition has that at the center of what we intend to achieve. That's why today we're unveiling our Global Decarbonization Accelerator. This is a comprehensive plan to transform the global energy system, and it's built on essentially three pillars. The first pillar is on how and rapidly we can build the energy system of today. At the heart of this is the pledge to triple renewable energy installation by 2030 and double the rate of energy efficiency. Adair here will talk a little bit more about the details of that, but this in itself has a huge ability to transform the pace of energy transition. We're already seeing renewables with the cost reductions and technology advancements have become the highest capacity addition to the global power sector every year. This will grow, and this signal will turbocharge that process. So this will make the building of the next energy system that much more rapid. The second challenge was to decarbonize the energy system of today. And the third is how do we reduce emissions quickly, given that we have 7 years to 2030 if we are going to be in alignment with the Paris goals. And essentially, this would be through eliminating methane and other non-CO2 gases. So on this, the Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge says tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency. More than 110 countries have so far signed on to this pledge, and this is growing by the day. We have a strong confidence that this will be one of the outcomes of the conference. Over the last year, this has been a strong message that the COP president has been carrying at political forums and energy forums, encouraging people to sign on to this. We were delighted when the G20 had language on tripling renewables and doubling energy efficiency, and here at the COP we want this to make this a universal pledge. But we will also build transparency into this and accountability into this. That's a central part of our strategy on energy, transparency and accountability. And for the renewables and energy efficiency pledge, we'll have annual reporting built into this with an annual ministerial meeting that will take stock of where we are in terms of meeting this target and hopefully even exceeding it. On decarbonizing the energy system of today, as important as renewables will be for tomorrow, there is a strong need to start to decarbonize at scale the traditional energy sources that we use today. This requires an energy transition that we believe needs to be fair, it needs to be just, it needs to be orderly, and it needs to be equitable. The potential disruption that comes with this needs to be avoided, and we need to create the social license for rapid decarbonization while we build the energy system of tomorrow. That's why a core element of this is going to be the Industrial Transition Accelerator. This is aimed at hard to abate and hard to electrify sectors such as aluminium, cement, steel, and heavy transportation. We are bringing industry to the table to make commitments. We're looking at measures both on the demand side and on the supply side to drive decarbonization in industry. And we're also aligning with the oil and gas industry around an ambitious set of commitments through our oil and gas decarbonization charter. This is highly significant. This charter includes oil and gas companies committing to zero methane emissions by 2030, ending routine flaring by 2030, and total net zero operations by 2050 at the latest. What we've achieved so far is that 50 very significant oil and gas signatories have joined. 29 are national oil companies. That in itself is highly significant because you have not seen national oil companies so evident in these discussions before. And 21 are international oil companies. Some of the largest oil and gas companies in the world have joined this, and they have committed to transparency and reporting on this. On methane and non-CO2 gases, as you know, methane is roughly 80 times more potent than CO2 in trapping heat in the atmosphere. It's responsible for around 30% of the rise in global temperatures since the Industrial Revolution. And tackling methane can quickly take off a significant portion of emissions from the table and go a long way to limit near-term temperature increase. We're aiming for measurable decreases in methane in a very rapid period of time, and Fred is going to talk to the substance of that in more detail. That's why we prioritize reducing methane and other non-CO2 gases. There has been a long process around this. We have been engaged with the US and China, and the recent Sunderland statement that was issued following consultations between Senator Kerry and Mr. Shea was really indicative of the intent. We are grateful for their support, and we also note the national plans for methane phase-out that are being developed in different countries, especially in China. We're also taking forward the cooling pledge, which targets a substantial reduction of global cooling emissions. Our target is 68% by 2050. That's especially significant in this region, where a large part of our energy load has to do with cooling. Over 50 countries have already endorsed this pledge, and we're calling on other countries to join us in this endeavor. With all of these elements coming together, we have two major drivers here. We have a short-term driver of decarbonization in the existing energy system that is measurable and impactful, and we have a long-term driver in terms of incentivizing the development of a low-carbon energy system of the future. We have a lot of countries committed to this. We've had a lot of support from leadership around the world, and we're looking forward to a very impactful process as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency Adnan. Unfortunately, His Excellency needs to leave and will not be taking questions. He has to leave for a very important meeting. Mr. Krupp, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, you know, for me, the high point of today was clearly the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter, which calls for the virtual elimination of methane emissions, the end of routine flaring, and a commitment to independent and public reporting of emissions using recognized international standards. Now, this new initiative, if the commitments are met, has the potential to reduce methane emissions by each of the companies signing up by an average of 80 to 90%. Now, coupled with the oil and gas methane standards that were finalized by the U.S. government also today, and the methane initiatives outlined in the UAE-China-U.S. summit that Adnan just referenced, in terms of the temperatures that we will otherwise see in the next decade, today could be the single most impactful day of announcements from any COP in my 30 years at the Environmental Defense Fund. Now, I did say if the commitments are met, and that's why I am so pleased to that the Bloomberg Philanthropies is directing $25 million of a $40 million new commitment to ending methane pollution to enable a new accountability partnership, an oil and gas methane accountability partnership, where the International Energy Agency and the UNEP's International Methane Emissions Observatory will hold industry accountable to the commitments that were announced today. Of course, as important as the methane reductions are, we cannot avoid the climate crisis by methane reductions alone. Zeroing out carbon dioxide pollution is also essential. Today's announcements, therefore, on the tripling of renewable energy and the doubling of energy efficiency are very welcome. But as the IEA, the International Agency, told us just last week, the oil and gas industry can and must do more to develop, deploy, and invest in the clean energy technologies of the future. In this respect, the oil and gas industry is still falling woefully short. But today, the good news is that we have it within our power to dramatically slow the rate of warming in our lifetime by the relatively simple acts of finding and fixing methane leaks and ending routine flaring of gas, which is wasteful of an energy resource as well as a powerful climate pollutant. And equally encouraging is the fact that we have tools like satellites that will soon be launched to independently monitor whether and how industry and countries today are or are not following through on the commitments that were made today. No longer do we have to settle for taking anyone's word for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Lord Adair, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, I'm the chair of the Energy Transition Commission, which is not an official commission of any sort. It is a voluntary coalition of companies from across the world which provides an independent challenge to the policies and actions that we need to get to net zero. And so I've been very pleased to be asked to give an independent comment on what has been announced this afternoon. I will make 3 comments. First, on oil and gas commitments on both CO2 and methane. These are crucially important because the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions of the fossil fuel system, the CO2 and the methane, which is produced in the production and the refining and the transport of fossil fuels, itself comes to about 6.5 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. And there are lots of technologically feasible ways to reduce and eliminate that, and it is essential to have strong commitments that we do so, and we do have some strong commitments on that specific area today. Now, of course, they're not sufficient in themselves to make the fossil fuel system zero carbon, because that 6.5 gigatons of Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions compares with 32 gigatons which result from the combustion of fossil fuel use. But this is a hugely important first step in addressing the emissions which will inevitably result as long as we continue to use fossil fuels. Secondly, on the industry transition accelerator, Reducing emissions from heavy industries and long-distance transport is vital. In total, those categories covered by this initiative result in about 10 gigatons of emissions per annum. The good news is that over the last 5 years, we have worked out all the technological routes that we need to get every one of those sectors to net zero by 2050. We know what is possible. But it won't happen without industry action galvanised by commitments, finance galvanised commitments, and, crucially, supporting government policies such as carbon pricing and regulations. And it is essential that we have a focus on all of those, which survives one COP and is a multi-COP initiative. And that is what the Industrial Transition Accelerator is, with a timeline of 3 years. It has the potential, but I insist only the potential, because it is at the moment the launch of a process to help us accelerate the feasible decarbonisation of those crucial sectors. Third, and perhaps most important, I want to comment on the energy package, the tripling of renewables capacity, and the commitment to double the pace of energy efficiency improvement. These commitments are also vital, and they will have very important implications for the changing balance of our energy system. The only way to achieve a net zero carbon economy is to electrify as much of the economy as possible and to decarbonise power generation as fast as possible. And these two initiatives address those 2 points. Tripling renewables capacity is an achievable objective by 2030, and we should be clear that beyond that, we will need to have significant growth in the 2030s and 40s. And it is therefore vital that governments across the world embrace this objective, or even in some cases more ambitious objectives, and crucially that they and the global financial institutions embrace the enabling actions which will actually make that possible. We need, for instance, investment in grids to make sure that grid capacity is not a limiting factor on the deployment of renewables. We need to make sure that planning and permitting systems don't prevent the growth of renewables. And in the lower income countries in particular, we have to mobilise huge flows of finance from the multilateral development banks and other development bank institutions to support the massive increase in renewables which we need in those countries. Doubling energy efficiency is also important, and it is important to realise that the primary route to achieve that will inevitably involve electrification. One of the primary contributors to doubling energy efficiency growth will be faster electrification of road transport, because electric vehicles use about a third as much energy per kilometre travelled as do internal combustion engine vehicles. So if you want to accelerate energy efficiency improvement, accelerate the electrification of road transport. The same is also true in residential heat in the cooler parts of the world. The biggest route to get there is to electrify residential heat, because when you electrify electrical heat with heat pumps, you get 3 or 4 kilowatts of heat for every kilowatt of electricity put in. And that means that we can get rid of the gas boilers. So these initiatives on both renewable energy capacity and energy efficiency are crucial to building the energy system of the future. And I think it's important to realise that they have inevitable implications for fossil fuel demand. If we achieve these objectives, we will also significantly reduce fossil fuel demand. If we achieve a tripling of renewable capacity, we will cut the use of coal and gas. And if we achieve that acceleration of energy efficiency, that will be a primary vehicle for reducing the use of oil and gas. And that will make it possible for us to phase down fossil fuel consumption, and therefore the 32 gigatons of emissions which come from Scope 3 fossil fuel emissions, fossil fuel emissions, rather than the 6.5 which is in the Scope 1 and 2 addressed by the specific oil and gas initiatives announced today. So I think this is a useful package, but as people have already said, it will only be useful if we actually follow through on the implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Turner, and thank you all for your remarks. I forgot to mention that we are joined here on stage by Alexander Serre from UN Climate Change, who will be taking any UNFCCC related questions. We'll now open the floor for questions, but before you begin, please, I would like to remind everyone, please state your name, your outlet, and who your question is addressed to. Thank you. Well, actually, I think we will be hearing from Mr. Krupp. He would like to mention a short story.
Yeah, well, I was thinking as I was walking over here that, you know, how did all this happen on methane in the oil and gas industry? And there was a Chatham House rule in effect for a private session until this oil and gas decarbonization charter was released. So I can now tell you that I was in Abu Dhabi back in September, and it was a closed-door room with many CEOs of the oil industry and some others of heavy industry. And we met, there were about 40 principals there. We met for 3 hours, and the COP presidency challenged the oil companies present to commit to lowering their methane emissions by what we calculate would be this 90%. And I watched the reaction of the companies in the room, and I really wasn't sure if they would do it or not. And then Dr. Sultan at noontime took the stage, and he started out his speech asking the CEOs actually started out his speech honestly saying, are there any media in the room? And there weren't any. And then he said, if there's any CEOs of oil companies in the room who think climate change isn't going to dramatically affect your business, you're mistaken. He then said that he had been asked to chair this COP a few months earlier, and he said, you know, none of them would have accepted the job, maybe for good reason, because by September, when we had this meeting, late September, he said he had already been subject of attacks almost every day. He said because of that, when the COP comes around, there was going to be a focus on himself, but not only himself, but inevitably the oil sector as well. And then he said, this could be the company's last chance to demonstrate that they could step up and do what needed to be done, at least take a big step. And he talked about the methane as an element of this, these reductions down to 0.2%, when now we know from our measurements the industry average is more like 2%. And he said, at the end of his talk, he said, I need you, I need your support, I need you to sign up. Are you with me? Are you in or are you out? By this point, the hair was standing up on the back of my neck. The room was entirely silent, but I didn't know if that silence was they were in or they were out. But at the end of the day, I had a chance to talk to Dr. Sultan, and I thanked him for his speech. It was one of the best speeches I've heard in my career. And after thanking him, I said, well, are they in or are they out? He had been having bilaterals all day. And he picked up his phone and he pointed it at me as I am pointing my phone at you, and he said, Fred, my phone has been lighting up all day. They are telling me they are in. So I just want to tell that story and thank Dr. Sultan for his leadership at bringing this industry in, such a high percentage of it. Not as many as we need. We need now the rest of the oil companies to join too. But this really is a momentous day. So that's the story I want to tell.
Thank you, Mr. Krupp. We'll now take questions. Gentleman in the fourth row.
Thank you to everyone on the panel. Sorry, it's James Murray from Business Green. If the North Star of the summit is to keep 1.5 degree alive, would the presidency like to see in the final text something reflecting, or a statement reflecting on the fact that all those oil and gas companies, or almost all of them that Fred just mentioned, their production plans are in no way aligned with 1.5 degrees? How does the presidency hope to square that circle?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question, and I just want to reiterate Fred's point. Thank you for telling that story. I was there and have had the good fortune also to be with Dr. Sultan all throughout this year in many of these really great conversations. And as you know, he always gives a master class in diplomacy, right, and in getting folks to deliver action. And I think that what we've done already is shown that we deliver action. We've delivered on the loss and damage fund. Not only have we operationalized it, but we've capitalized it, and nobody expected that we would be able to do that. We've delivered an agenda from day one, and everybody is in a positive mood. We've delivered finance, a finance framework. We've delivered a finance vehicle, and today we've delivered what was asked by many of us over the course of this year, was to bring oil and gas into the conversation in a meaningful way. There is no doubt that there is a lot of work to be done. And we as a COP presidency have said that from the very beginning, that these are not easy steps to take. And Fred's story, I think, demonstrates that. But no doubt that this is a historic outcome. We need to get, 1.5 has been our North Star from the very beginning, and we've taken it in a very systematic way to think about how do you achieve that. And we said to ourselves at the beginning of the year, how can we achieve that if we exclude a whole sector from the conversation? We can't do that in a practical way by being exclusive. What we've done today with this declaration is we've brought that industry, we've challenged them with ambitious targets. Of course, we need them to step up, but this is also a process that is made up of non-negotiated and negotiated outcomes. On the non-negotiated side, we have delivered industry. We need them to go further, and if you were at his speech today, Dr. Sultan very clearly said, we need more, we need to go further. So it's a first step. I think it's one that we should all celebrate. And then on the negotiated side, we need the negotiators to come together now and clearly tell us how they want to address energy in the negotiations. We've laid out that challenge through the GDA, through the actions that's happened in the real economy, and now we need negotiators to focus on the global stocktake. They need to show us clearly how we get back on track to achieving our climate goals. That's what the global stocktake is about. That's why it's so important. We need to deliver on mitigation. We need to, and we've always said remember our 4 pillars. We need to fast track the energy transition. We need to decarbonize the energy system of today. That's why we have that amazing step with methane and some of the other things that we've achieved today. But we need to triple renewable energy. We need to double energy efficiency. We need to build the energy system of the future, because we need to give people the choices that they can make. So we're talking to them about what we're giving them rather than what we're taking away, so that they can make those choices that we want them to make. Then we need to fix finance. Consistently, as we travel around the world, we've heard that we don't have the capital to make these changes that we need. How do we mobilize finance? That's why Finance Day yesterday was so important, and that's why we delivered on each of those different elements in terms of finance. But we need others to come in to move from hundreds of billions to trillions. We need the support of the global community. We need to think about people's lives and livelihoods. This needs to be about adaptation. This needs to be a just transition. It needs to be about equity. It needs to be how we do this in an orderly way, in a just way. And then we can only do that if we do it in an inclusive conversation. That's about having industry at the table, but it's also about young people. It's also about indigenous communities. It's also about farmers. It's also about the average person in the public thinking about how they make the choices that they will. But to your point, exactly, we need the governments to send the signal, and that will come from the parties sitting down in the rooms over these 2 weeks, coming together and delivering the outcome that we all expect from them.
Thank you, Ambassador Majid, for that comprehensive answer. Next question. Lady in the first row.
Thank you. I got 2 questions. First of all, my name is Aham Habib. I'm from Kirkuk now.
Please limit your questions to 1 and mention who it's directed to.
Okay, let me choose. Okay, my question is to Ambassador Saudi. Like, there have been critics on the loss and damage fund, like since it's under the umbrella of World Bank out there, because I've heard these critics a lot out there. So, is there a chance that COP28 comes up with a proposal to change the routine or the proposal of the vision of the loss and damage fund, like in the future?
So I think that the Loss and Damage Fund is really a testament to the great diplomacy of our team, of Dr. Sultan, and we've had very difficult nights where we've worked through delivering on it. Back in September, when we had TC4, parties were really far away from delivering an outcome. But our COP president didn't accept that. He said that he wanted to have an extraordinary meeting here in Abu Dhabi, the TC5, and in that we were able to work with parties to get them to deliver a recommendation. This is a recommendation of the Transitional Committee. So we as a COP presidency, our role was to bring them together, put them in the room, push them to deliver the outcome, and what was our mandate at COP27? To operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund and its funding arrangements. What did we deliver? We operationalized the Loss and Damage Fund and its funding arrangements, and we capitalized the Loss and Damage Fund. I think that this is a huge success that we should all celebrate. I think that the recommendations came from the committee, was accepted by the parties. For us as a COP presidency, our job is done.
Thank you, Ambassador Majid. Please.
Hi, I'm Ivy In. I'm Energy Transition Specialist with S&P Global. So my question is to Mr. Krop with EDF. So as you mentioned, like China played an important role in cutting methane emissions. I want to know why none of the three China oil majors, Sinopec, PetroChina, and CNOOC, none of them are in today's pledge. What are the challenges that limit them to be part of it? Thank you.
Actually, I need to go back at the list. I don't want to verify that that's the case. I had heard before the list came out that there might have been one of the Chinese oil companies. I don't know. Have you looked at the list? Yeah. Okay. But I do want to say that China's, in the United States, the biggest source of methane is oil and gas. In China, it's actually coal. More than half coal is a very big source of methane, believe it or not, and more than half of the world's methane from coal comes from Chinese coal mines. The hopeful news here is that there are many less coal mines in China than there are oil wells in the United States or anywhere else. It's relatively concentrated into a few hundred, as opposed to in the United States we have hundreds of thousands. I mean, a huge amount of a million oil wells in the United States. So it's more tractable. And I'm very heartened to see just in the last couple of months China come up with a comprehensive national plan on methane. So I'm very hopeful about China.
Thank you, Mr. Krop. Final question, please. Lady in the second.
Thank you. Apologies for the cold. I'm Vanya Walker-Lee from the Malta Business Weekly, and this is my 22nd COP since Kyoto, when many of you weren't born. I'm having extreme difficulty in watching the press briefings. They don't seem to happen simultaneously, and they're still not there the next day. There's sort of blank blue screen. So would you please do something about that?
I will make sure that we get that sorted for you and come back tomorrow and tell me if it's better, inshallah. Our comms team, I'm sure, are scrambling right now. So thank you for raising it for us, and we'll make sure we improve it. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. I'd like to express our gratitude for our speakers and for everyone that has attended today's press conference, and look forward to seeing you again here tomorrow at 5 p.m. And if you have any further inquiries, please feel free to reach our press office. Thank you once again and have a great evening.